This weekend was supposed to be a massive recruiting weekend for Nebraska. They had 9 official visitors locked in. 5 or 6 of them were consensus 4-star recruits, all at positions of need. Now, over time, Nebraska either was eliminated from consideration, the prospects committed elsewhere, whatever the case happened. So then Nebraska was left with 3 official visitors for this weekend going into Wednesday. And then Nebraska locked in 2 big-time consensus 4-star recruits, 4 official visits this weekend. Before we dive into that, though, always want to thank our members. Claude Derry, RoboFlock, Todd Richards, Pit Snipe, Brandon Lee, Bone Lead Cornfed, Justin Ruggie, and MD Kozman. Thank you so much for being members and subscribers, liking our videos. All that stuff helps us out a ton. So not only thank you to them, but thank you to everybody else who tunes in each and every week. Now, without further ado, let's dive in to the Crootin. First up on our list, 4-star Jacob Eberhart. Now, actually, I'm going to backtrack real quickly here. So when I said on Wednesday it was confirmed, that's when I posted this tweet here. 2 big-time guys now coming in this weekend for OVs just added. Valden Son, 4-star defensive tackle, and 4-star athlete. Probably ends up on defense. Want to specify that. Mr. Jacob Eberhart, 4-star athlete, composite 4-star, really good size, 6'3", 200+ pounds. Very similar prospect to 4-star athlete from last year's class, Jeremiah Jones. I see a lot of similarities between the two. Now, originally, when you think back to Jeremiah Jones recruitment, it was, could he be a jack linebacker? Could he be a tight end? Could he be a rover? Could he be a wide receiver? Now, he's starting at wide receiver for Nebraska. Jacob Eberhart's very similar in the sense where he's more limited to a wide receiver or a defensive back or a safety because he's not as big as Jeremiah Jones. Where Nebraska likes him, I believe, is at rover/safety. Now, I wouldn't rule out nickel either, but I like his size at safety and or rover. In terms of his recruitment, I said this on the call-in show last night. I like where Oklahoma's at. I like where Missouri is at. He just had an official visit to Missouri. He's coming to Nebraska this weekend and then going to Oklahoma. Nebraska's got room to make up. They've got a smaller visit this weekend. There's only 6 guys coming now. I'm sorry, 5 guys that are coming instead of the original 9. They've got room to make up. There's not going to be any shortage of attention on Jacob. Nebraska is going to show him what a priority target he is in this secondary because he's one of maybe 2, maybe 3 safeties that Nebraska is in on and sees in their defense for the foreseeable future. The other one's Devin Jackson, and that recruitment seems to be fading a little bit here. So Nebraska's got some room to make up. They're going to sell him on their vision for him in their defense this weekend. Also, don't sleep on Alabama. They're pushing, and they're trying to get him in for an official visit. I know he wants to go to an official visit to Alabama. In terms of his grand scheme of his recruitment, right now I'm really focused on Oklahoma. I'm really focused on Missouri. If that visit to Bama happens, then, maybe you get some momentum with Bama. But right now it's really an Oklahoma, Missouri, Nebraska battle. I think Oklahoma is probably a slight favorite, or Missouri. They're like 1A or 1B. It is really close right now between those two. Nebraska's got their work cut out this weekend. We're going to stay in the secondary here, switch on over to 3-star cornerback Darien Jones. Obviously, his brother Donovan Jones is on the team, so there is a little familiarity there with the program, with Nebraska, with that family. Now, he's got good size, just like his brother, 6'1", 170, 175 pounds or so. A couple of weeks ago, when we gave you an update on his recruitment, we said, you're looking at Minnesota, K-State, Iowa State, Nebraska, and of course, Iowa. I still think it's an Iowa-Nebraska battle. I said that a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to say that again today. I think Nebraska definitely has some room to make up on Iowa. They've definitely created some separation over the last month or so. However, everything can change this weekend. Nebraska has to be aggressive because they were a little late to the party with his recruitment. We said that a couple weeks ago. They were late to offer. They've obviously pushed in his recruitment, made some moves in his recruitment, but they got to continue to be aggressive here. Nebraska is only going to take 2 corners, maybe 3 in this recruiting class. Danny Odom would be like an obvious take, right? No question about it. But you can't guarantee that he's going to commit to Nebraska. So if you've locked down CJ Bruneau like we think they have, you have to have that opposite corner to pair with him. And I think that's what they're going to sell Darien on, is being that opposite corner of CJ, being locked down corners together for the foreseeable future. Now, Iowa does get the last visit. Can Nebraska move ahead of Iowa this weekend and then stay ahead after his visit to Iowa, and then on his commitment date on July 4th, pick Nebraska? That's the question. There's ground to make up. And going into this weekend, I'm still saying Iowa. We'll recap the weekend on Tuesday on our Huskers live show, and I'll tell you what I'm thinking then. Moving over to the offensive line, Mr. Leon Noil Jr. Nebraska likes him at guard. I think his height on 247 is actually wrong. I think he's closer to 6'5.5" or maybe even 6'6". Weight's probably a little low as well. He's probably in that 265 range. Nebraska's in a good spot right now with his recruitment going into the visit weekend. Now, he did just come off a visit to Baylor. That is a big-time visit for him. They're a huge, not a huge, but I would say they're a slight favorite right now for Leon. Now, here is where, ideally you can pair him with Rex at guard. Then you get Hayden Ainsworth at right tackle. If you get Ryan Moret, then you get him at center. And then either Kelvin Obot or Claude Mapuma would be your left tackle. That would be a really solid offensive line class. Now, this is where it gets maybe a little jumbled. If Nebraska looks at Hayden Ainsworth as a guard, now I'm expecting Hayden to commit to Nebraska on Monday. That's what he announced his commitment. I'm expecting that commitment. So if Nebraska looks at Hayden as a guard, this could look or cause Leon to look elsewhere, because you don't need 4 interior offensive linemen in one class, being Ryan, Hayden, and Rex on top of Leon. That's just a lot of interior offensive linemen. So that's why it depends on how Nebraska identifies Hayden at Nebraska. Is he a tackle? Is he a guard? What is he? Now, I've got mixed info. Some guys say he's a guard. Some guys say he's a tackle. He's got the frame for a tackle, which he certainly does. That's why I've always been saying he's either or. I prefer him at guard, but I'm also not a coach. I'm not the one that's in charge of this stuff. So my opinion on that probably means jack. But for what it's worth, I like him as a guard. So that's why there's a lot going on with this recruitment here. I think Nebraska does like Hayden at tackle, though. So that is why they're going to continue. They're going to bring in Leon this weekend. And I think they're going to push for a commitment. It's going to be a big battle between Nebraska and Baylor, at least the way I see it right now. Moving on over to the backfield. Nebraska's got 3-star running back Jamal Rule coming in town. This is back-to-back weeks of running backs in town. Last week you had 4-star Brian Bonner. This week you got Jamal Rule, and then the next week you get to Zephan Walker. We're going to get to that here in just a second. For Jamal Rule, it seems really close right now with his recruitment. I believe Nebraska was in the lead a month or so ago. Then they kind of slipped a little bit, but not too much, not drastically. Boston College, North Carolina State, Syracuse are the main competitors right now. Virginia Tech, I think, is a dark horse that is kind of making some moves in his recruitment. He did just have an official visit there last week. And then Boston College will be his visit following Nebraska. So this is very much an East Coast-centric recruitment. And then your outlier is Nebraska. We've talked about this a lot with a lot of prospects, where a lot of the schools they're looking at are very regionalized and in where they live. And then your outlier is Nebraska. As you can see on his profile here, he's from Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, he's a guy Nebraska identified early and does like quite a bit. But again, it's just convincing is probably not the right word, but it's the word I'm going to use. Convincing a player to move halfway across the country. That's where their challenge is with this whole entire recruiting class, not just Jamal Rule at this point. Now, he is a take for Nebraska. Part of it depends on where things sit with the Zephan Walker. coming out of his official visit to Oklahoma this weekend, and also a little bit with Brian Bonner as well. Are they taking one running back or do they take two? Because they're making up good, solid ground on Brian Bonner. That official visit went phenomenal by all accounts. Nebraska would take Rule. Don't get me wrong. I want to stress that right away. If he decided to commit, Nebraska would take his commitment. He's a different style running back than does Stephen Walker and Brian Bonner. He's more of a physical, ground and pound style running back compared to the other two. So it would be more of like a lightning to thunder situation here with Jamal Rule pairing with Stephen Walker or Brian Bonner. But again, do those running backs, let's say Nebraska lands Rule, do those running backs want to be the second running back in the class going into a running back room that has Emmett Johnson back after this season, Quentin Ives is back after this season, Connor Booth is a redshirt freshman or a freshman going into 2026-2027 season, and then Jamarian Parker as well. That would just be a very clouded running back room, very clogged, not real great for playing time. And it might not be the best situation. So that's why I say, do they take one or two? It's hard to know right now. And personally, I think you take one because of what I just mentioned. There's so many running backs in that room right now. We totally just left off Mekhi Nelson too. So it's another running back. So I think Nebraska likely takes one, and it's going to be one of the three: Rule, Walker, or Bonner. And I think it's hard to gauge. I think Nebraska has a legit chance to land Brian Bonner right now. So if they take Rule's commitment, that may indicate that I'm wrong and they didn't feel great about Bonner. They didn't feel great about Walker coming into that OU visit. But it's worth monitoring over the next week or two to see what happens with this running back room. Does Stephen Walker even make it to his official visit to Nebraska next weekend? That'll be a tall tale sign of where Nebraska's running back room sits. So keep your eyes on that. Defense. Now, this was a position in which there's a lot of room for improvement on the recruiting trail. You've got one linebacker commit, and that's Jace Reynolds. You missed out on Ja'Cory Smith, the 4-star linebacker from Arkansas. You missed out on Jordan Campbell, the 4-star linebacker from Miami, and you very likely are going to miss out on Cason Thomas, who just officially visited last weekend. I still think that's an Iowa State battle. So Nebraska has really put a lot more effort into getting Calvin Thomas. His visit kind of took me by surprise a little bit. He's on my big board for kind of the prospects I'm tracking at the linebacker position. His recruitment has been hard to read. So I don't want to sit here and tell you, Nebraska's in a great spot, or, Nebraska's ground to make up. It's a hard recruitment to read. Now, we do know his top four is Michigan, North Carolina, SMU, and Nebraska. So they're in a decent spot, at least in terms of the overall grouping. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Nebraska's a favorite or Nebraska's running in second or third. It's just, I don't have a lot on his recruitment, just to be fully honest and transparent there. I think Nebraska did kind of fall off from his recruitment in the spring months. He didn't come and visit during the spring like a lot of prospects did. They were really high on Ja'Cory Smith, we just talked about, and they missed out on him. Jordan Campbell, like I just mentioned, and Cason Thomas. So I think those three were the top prospects they were looking to pair with Jace Reynolds, just from my perspective at least, and they missed out on all of them. So now they have to kind of re-engage and go a lot harder at landing a guy like Calvin Thomas, who by all accounts is a terrific linebacker with great size at 6'3", 210, really good speed, lateral mobility. He's a composite 4-star. He's a top 250 or so player in the country. Now, where does Nebraska go if they miss out on Calvin Thomas? That would mean you missed out on essentially every linebacker prospect you went after except for Jace Reynolds. So this is what I want you to do. If they miss out on Calvin Thomas, you really need to keep your eyes out for Elkhorn South's Jaden Sutko. Now, he's a guy that doesn't really have much offers. I'm going to pull up his profile here in a minute. And actually, I'll pull it up now. Here's his profile. Really good size at 6'2", 210 pounds. Really good testing numbers. Long jump was good. 40 was like a 4.5 40. He had a really good 10-yard split. He's a really good athlete. I think he's just a little bit underscouted. Now, he's definitely more of a traditional Rule recruit, a type of prospect that you have to develop over years, 2-3 years down the road, you might see him on the field. So he's not a guy that you're going to have come in and make an instant impact, at least not right now. He's a really, a true development player. Now, Nebraska has been in contact with him. They're monitoring his recruitment. They're being very transparent about where they're at with his recruitment. I don't know if like the true walk-on is a thing anymore, with NIL and rev share and stuff like that. But would they or could they put him on some type of a walk-on deal or a lower cost NIL deal? Absolutely. This is that prospect where, you think of a guy like Connor Schutt, or you think of a guy like Nate Borkacher, for example, like former guys, walk-ons that turned into scholarship players that could be very good for you. May not be, all world beaters or whatever, but they could be solid players. So his recruitment is something just to kind of keep in the back of your mind as something that Nebraska could do. Looking at his offer list here, it's very, prevalent, I guess, that he's not a widely known recruit. He's got Air Force, Fresno State, Northern Illinois, South Dakota, and South Dakota State. So he's got 2 group of 4 offers or 5, or wherever that it's called, a group of 5, Air Force and Fresno State. Oh, I guess 3, Northern Illinois as well. So it's not like he's like a highly sought after recruit, even in the lower levels either. So I think it's just testing for him that he needs to, get out and test and go to camps and whatnot. And he's doing that. And you may see some bigger schools come in with offers, but by bigger, I mean like MAC schools or something like that. Nothing crazy, but it's worth monitoring his recruitment. And then we're going to wrap it up. Mr. Valden Son, 6'3", 316 pounds, consensus 4-star defensive tackle, top 4 on 247 on the composite rankings as well. Very, very highly rated player, top 200 on the composite, and 247 has him as a top 50 player overall in the country. Nebraska is going all out for Valden Son's recruitment, and rightfully so. His top group, I still believe, is Oklahoma and Florida. Georgia came in with an offer over the spring, which we covered at the time. They're trying to snag him in for an official visit this weekend. Now, this is where there's just like not a ton of clarity. I've been told that he's coming in with the PPI recruits from Europe yesterday and today, and then will be leaving from Nebraska to Georgia tonight or this afternoon, probably by the time this video is uploaded. There's other people that I've heard from that say, no, this is an official visit. He's here Thursday night, all day Friday, all day Saturday, and then leaving Sunday. So kind of conflicting reports. The big thing is, though, he's on campus, and you have to shoot your shot. We're watching Auburn. He just officially visited there. Ohio State's trying to get into the recruitment as well. But overall, I think Nebraska's in his top 3, if not top 4 for sure. But they've got, at the end of the day, they've got to back up the frickin' Brinks trunk here. There's some guys that are worth overpaying as high school prospects. And when your team is clawing back to relevancy, this is one of those dudes that say the average price is $400,000. And you know that $550 or $600 gets him to be in. He's one of those dudes you overpay for. This guy has all the makings of an elite, powerful disruptor at defensive tackle for Nebraska, and it's their biggest position of need. After this season, you lose Elijah Judy, and then all you've got is RVP Sua Lafotu, who's never really played in his 2+ years at Nebraska, and that's like pretty much it. David Hufkin's probably still a year or 2 away. There's just no depth for Nebraska defensive tackle. And if you're planning to use the portal next year to get a defensive tackle, that price is going to be even higher for a proven defensive tackle from the Power 5, Power 4 level than it would be for an elite high-end recruit coming out of high school. Nebraska has to drop off the Brinks truck and just say, load it up with however much money you think you need, and we'll get it for you. That's what they need to do. Nebraska's gone in home twice in the spring with Valden Son. One time, Coach Braden went to Sweden to meet with his family. At the same time, E.J. Barthel was in Virginia meeting with Son. You have to do it at the same time because of recruiting rules. That was a big-time play by Nebraska. They're the only school that's done that. It made an impression. But was it enough to put you over the edge and land the commitment from Valden Son. He said he wants to commit sometime in July. July is quickly approaching. We're 2 weeks away, and Nebraska's got to make up some ground with Valden Son. And then to wrap up the videos, no longer visiting this week, Dominic Turnbull. I thought he'd probably be the next to commit to Nebraska. And then if you recall, the other day I said, CJ Bruneau will sign with Nebraska. I'm sticking to it, and that is why Dominic Turnbull is no longer visiting Nebraska. They feel very good about where they're at with CJ. And then on top of that, you really have your pick of the litter between Danny Odom, Darien Jones, and maybe one or two other guys that are maybe a little bit higher on your board. Now, granted, I love Dominic Turnbull. I think he's fantastic. But Danny Odom is an elite corner that you have a legit chance to land. He was being pushed by Oklahoma to commit this past weekend, and he did it. He's going to visit Ohio State this weekend and then Nebraska. If he does come to Nebraska for their official visit, I like our chances of walking away with Danny Odom as a Husker. That's a hell of a cornerback tandem. CJ, Danny, maybe Darien as well. It's a hell of a cornerback tandem at Nebraska. Then obviously Jaden Warren, 4-star receiver, no longer visiting. Deacon Schmidt eliminated Nebraska, the 4-star tackle from Colorado. Ja'Cory Smith, talked about him. He committed to Oklahoma. Jace Reynolds is no longer visiting this weekend. Not a big deal. He's coming next weekend, which actually is probably going to be a bigger weekend. It'd be nice to have a commitment on campus to help peer recruit. Titan Davis, clearly no longer considering Nebraska, and Nasir Rankin committed to Illinois. That's all we've got for today. We will see you Tuesday on Huskers Live at 6 p.m. Central Time. We'll see y'all there.